Matt Piscatella over at Circana just dropped the December 2025 sales data. And if you go by the headlines, oh man, it's a party at Nintendo headquarters. Switch 2 was the best-selling hardware in December. It's the fastest-selling video game hardware platform in tracked history. It hit 4.4 million units in 7 months. It's 35% ahead of PS4, nearly double the original Switch. And you know what? Every single one of those statements is technically true. But here's the thing about truth in this industry. It's like a magic trick. The trick isn't the lie. The trick is what they're not showing you. It's the misdirection. It's the carefully chosen words. It's the shit they leave out. Because if they told you the whole story, you'd realize this success is actually a fucking disaster. So let me be the guy who pulls back the curtain. Because I've been tracking this console since day one. And every single time, I get swarmed by the Nintendo Defense Force telling me I'm wrong, I'm a hater, I'm a Sony shill, I'm whatever insult makes them feel better about defending a $450 handheld that's sitting on shelves collecting dust. But guess what? The data just proved me right again. And I'm gonna walk you through exactly how Nintendo, Circana, and the entire gaming media complex just tried to sell you a turd sandwich and call it filet mignon. First, let's talk about this fastest selling video game hardware platform in tracked history claim. Sounds impressive, right? Wrong. Because here's what Matt Piscatella actually said on Bluesky when someone asked him about it. The Game Boy Advance is still the fastest selling hardware platform overall after 7 months. The Game Boy Advance, a console from 2001, a handheld that cost $99.99, a device that launched into a market a fraction of the size of today's industry. That console is still ahead of the Switch 2. So what gives? How can the Switch 2 be the fastest selling if the GBA beat it? Simple. They changed the definition. See, when they say video game hardware platform, they mean consoles. Home consoles, they're excluding handhelds. But here's the problem. The Switch 2 is a freaking handheld. It's a portable device, you can play it on the go, the dock is an accessory. This thing is competing in the same market as the Game Boy Advance, the 3DS, the original Switch. But because Nintendo and Circana want to make this launch look good, they've decided arbitrarily that the Switch 2 is a console and the GBA is a portable. Convenient, huh? And the fanboys? Oh, they're eating this up. Well, technically, it's a hybrid, so it counts as a console. Bro, the mental gymnastics here are Olympic level. You're telling me the Switch 2 is a console when it's competing with PS5, but it's not a handheld when we're comparing it to the GBA. Which one is it? Because you can't have it both ways. The narrative keeps shifting because they need it to shift. They need to find a way to spin this into a win. Because if they told you the truth, that the Switch 2 is underperforming expectations and struggling to maintain momentum, the stock would tank and the media cycle would turn on them. So instead, we get this carefully worded press release that technically isn't lying, but is absolutely designed to mislead you. Now let's talk about December, because this is where it gets really ugly. Matt Piscatella says the Switch 2 was the best-selling hardware in December 2025, units and dollars. Sounds great, except it freaking needed to be. This is Nintendo's first holiday season with a brand new console. This is the moment they've been building toward. The hype machine has been running at full speed since the June reveal. This was supposed to be the moment where the Switch 2 demolished the competition and proved all the doubters wrong. And what actually happened? The Switch 2 barely scraped by. Let me give you some context. Chris Dring over at GamesIndustry.biz reported back on January 8th that Switch 2 sales during the November-December holiday period were down 35% compared to the original Switch in 2017. Said he was painting the US market as worse than it actually was. But guess what? Chris Dring was right. Circana's data this morning confirmed it. Let me do the math for you, because Matt Piscatella sure as hell isn't gonna spell it out. The Switch 2 ended 2025 with 4.4 million units sold in the US. Back in August, at the end of its second month, it was at 2.4 million. That means from September to December, it sold 2 million units. We know from previous Circana reports that October sales were around 328,000 units. September was probably in the 330,000 to 420,000 range. There were no major releases that month. November's combined Switch 1 plus Switch 2 sales were down 10% year over year, putting Switch 2 somewhere in the 450,000 range. That leaves December. And if we're generous, really generous, the Switch 2 sold somewhere between 800,000 and 1 million units in December. So the total November plus December sales, roughly 1.3 to 1.55 million units. Now compare that to the original Switch in November plus December. The original Switch sold 2 2 to 2.3 million units during its first holiday season. December 2017 alone saw 1.5 million units sold. That's a 35 to 40% drop. Chris Dring was fucking right. And here's the kicker. The original Switch was supply constrained during the holidays. You couldn't find one on shelves, people were camping outside stores. I know because I was one of them. The Switch 2? Fully stocked since July. No supply issues, and it still got curb stomped by its predecessor. But wait, there's more. See, the Switch 2 had another problem in November. It got absolutely destroyed by the PS5, Sony's 5-year-old console, a console that's supposedly underperforming and too expensive, outsold Nintendo's brand new flagship in November. So what changed in December? Why did the Switch 2 suddenly win? Discounts. Retailers like Walmart, Target, Best Buy, and Micro Center saw the November numbers and panicked. They were sitting on stock. So starting on Cyber Monday, December 1st, they started slashing prices. $50 off the OLED model. Micro Center even dropped the base model to $400. And you know what? It worked. December sales improved. Not enough to match the original Switch, but enough to beat the PS5. But here's what Nintendo doesn't want you to know. These discounts were not part of the plan. Nintendo expected this console to sell at full price. They were banking on demand being so high that people would pay $400 or $500, hell, even more on the secondary market. Instead, retailers had to eat the cost of discounts just to move units. And even with those discounts, the Switch 2 still underperformed compared to the original Switch. Let that sink in. The Switch 2 on discount during the holidays with zero supply constraints still couldn't match the original Switch's performance from Okay, let's go back to this fastest selling console claim. Because even if we accept Circana's arbitrary definition that excludes handhelds, there's another problem. The Switch 2 is 35% ahead of the PS4 at the same point in its life cycle, nearly double the original Switch. That sounds amazing, except the PS4 was severely supply constrained at launch. Sony couldn't make enough units. If they had shipped even half of another shipment, the PS4 would have been ahead of the Switch 2 by month 2. And the original Switch? It launched in March. It didn't get its holiday bump in the first 7 months. The Switch 2 launched in June. It got both the launch hype and the holiday bump in its first 7 months. So yeah, of course it's ahead. It got 2 major sales bumps instead of 1. That's not impressive. That's basic math. And here's what's going to happen. By the end of March, the Switch 2 is going to enter its slow months. January, February, March. These are historically weak months for console sales. No major releases, post-holiday slump, and during that time, the original Switch is going to catch up, maybe even surpass it. By the end of this year, the PS4 will probably pass it too. Because the PS4 had an insane first December when supply constraints eased 1.9 million units. That's 26% more than the Switch 2 just sold. So this fastest selling console title, it's got maybe 3 more months, tops. And when it's gone, the fanboys are going to shift the narrative again. Well, the original Switch was a once-in-a-generation success. It's not fair to compare. The PS4 launched in a different market, blah blah blah. Let me give you some historical context. Because the Switch 2's first December wasn't just bad compared to the original Switch. It was bad compared to almost every major console ever. Here's a list of consoles that were not released during the holiday season, but still outsold the Switch 2 in their first December. Game Boy Advance June launch, 1.7 million. 3DS March launch, 1.6 million. Original Switch March launch, 1.5 million. PSP 1.12 million. And here's a list of consoles that were released in November, meaning their second December was still affected by supply constraints, but they still outsold the Switch 2. PS2, 1.95 million. Wii, 1.35 million. Xbox One, 1.28 million. Xbox 360, 1.13 million. Xbox Series X, S 1.08 million. Nintendo DS, 1.07 million. PS4, 1.065 million. Original Xbox, 1.033 million. The only major console the Switch 2 beat in its first December, the PS5, which sold 850,000 units and was still severely supply constrained. The Switch 2's first December was worse than almost every major console in history. The only thing it can brag about is beating a supply-constrained PS5. Oh, and it also beat the Wii U. Congratulations, Nintendo. Your $450 flagship console performed better than the biggest commercial failure in your company's history. Pop the freaking champagne. Here's what's going to happen next. On February 4th, Nintendo is going to release their quarterly earnings report, and it's going to show that they shipped 16 to 17 million Switch 2 units worldwide during the holiday quarter. And the fanboys are going to lose their minds. See? 17 million units. The Switch 2 is a massive success, except shipped does not equal sold. Shipped means Nintendo manufactured the consoles and sent them to retailers. Sold means customers actually bought them. And here's the thing, we know the Switch 2 didn't sell 17 million units. We have the US data from Circana. We have the Japan data from Famitsu. And if we extrapolate those numbers worldwide, the Switch 2 probably sold around 13 million units by the end of December. That means there's a gap of 3 to 4 million units, unsold inventory sitting in warehouses and on store shelves. And you know what happens when retailers are stuck with unsold inventory? They stop ordering new stock. So the next quarterly report, the one ending March 31st, is going to show a massive drop-off because retailers overestimated demand. They looked at the original Switch's performance. They looked at PS5 and Xbox Series XS. They thought this is going to sell like crazy, and it didn't. So now they're stuck with stock, and they're not going to order more until they clear what they have. This is going to be a slow motion car crash, and the media is going to keep spinning it as a success until the wheels fall off. So why did this happen? Why is the Switch 2 struggling? It's the fucking price, bro. The Switch 2 costs $450 for the base model, $500 for the OLED. That's Nintendo's most expensive console ever. And it's launching into a market where the PS5 and Xbox Series X are also expensive and also struggling with price sensitivity. Consumers are tired. They're tired of being nickel and dimed. They're tired of paying premium prices for incremental upgrades. They're tired of being told just wait for the exclusives when there's nothing worth playing at launch. And here's the proof. The only reason December sales improved was because of discounts. When the price dropped, people bought it. When the price was $450 to $500, they didn't. It's that simple. Nintendo knows this. They've seen the data, but they're stuck between a rock and a hard place. If they drop the price, they admit the launch pricing was a mistake. If they raise the price, which some analysts are suggesting due to tariffs and component costs, they risk killing momentum entirely. So what do? They pray. They hope that a 3D Mario or a new Zelda will drive demand. They hope that consumers will forget about the price and just buy it anyway. But here's the thing, that's not how this works. The 3DS launched at $25, sales were abysmal, Nintendo dropped the price to $170 by August, and then the 3DS started selling. The same thing is going to happen here. Nintendo is going to resist a price drop for as long as possible. They're going to pump out the exclusives. They're going to lean on Mario Kart World bundles. They're going to do everything they can to avoid admitting they fucked up. But eventually, Nintendo is going to have to lower the price. The shoppers are sending a very clear message, $450 is too much money. But even though this is obvious, the superfans keep defending the company. I've been watching how fans talk about this, and they are basically refusing to accept reality. It's not about facts anymore. The fans are just trying to protect their favorite brand. They have gone through 3 stages of making excuses. Stage 1, the hype shield. Remember how confident they were? They promised this console would be sold out for months, but back in July, stores were full of them. Instead of admitting that people weren't buying them, fans made excuses about shipping. They said Nintendo is just really good at stocking shelves. They refused to see the truth. Seeing a popular new console sitting on a shelf in the summer isn't a good thing. Stage 2, the pandemic excuse. When the sales numbers weren't as high as the PS5 or Xbox Series X, the excuse was, you can't compare it to the pandemic boom when everyone stayed home. That is fair, but if you compare it to the original Switch, which came out when there was no pandemic, the new console still looks weak. The first Switch became popular naturally. This new one is running out of steam fast. Stage 3, selective memory. This is where we are now. Fans are only looking at the headlines they like, such as fastest selling console, while ignoring the facts that prove otherwise. They are forgetting about older legends like the Game Boy Advance just to make Nintendo look like the winner. They are celebrating wins that aren't completely true.